The first rumble of thunder was not from the sky, but from the ground. The alien armies marched across the plains, their banners rising high against the storm clouds. Among them stood the proud warriors of the Zarin Empire, their armor glowing. Under the dim light, they had ruled this land for centuries, crushing any who resisted. To them, the humans were nothing but a primitive species with no power worth fearing. In the middle of the field, a small group of human fighters stood in a rough line. Their weapons were old, their armor mismatched. The Zarin commanders looked at them and laughed. How could these simple creatures think they could win against the might of the Empire? The laughter grew louder when one human, taller than the rest, stepped forward holding nothing but a plain wooden spear. His name was Kale, a farmer's son from the hill country. His eyes were calm, but there was something in them that made even the alien captain pause for a moment. The captain dismissed the feeling and raised his blade. The storm above rolled louder, as if the clouds themselves were watching. Kale did not raise his voice. He simply planted the spear into the ground and waited. The wind tugged at his clothes and lifted strands of his hair. Behind him, the other humans looked uneasy. They had never fought the Zarin before, and the enemy's size and strange armor filled them with fear. The Zarin leader walked closer, his voice carrying over the field. "Do you think that stick will save you, human?" His soldiers laughed again, the sound sharp and cruel. Kale only looked at him and then at the clouds. The storm was building fast, and the smell of rain and iron filled the air. Somewhere in the alien ranks, a figure watched more closely. She was different from the others, her skin deep blue and her eyes bright like molten silver. Her armor was more ornate, her posture more graceful. She was the daughter of the Zarin warlord, sent here to witness the humiliation of the human resistance. But as she looked at Kale, her laughter died before it could begin. Kale tightened his grip on the faggot spear. Lightning flickered above, and the ground trembled under the alien march. The blue-skinned princess leaned forward slightly, her curiosity growing. She had seen hundreds of humans break and kneel before her father's army. This one did not kneel. This one did not even flinch. The alien captain gave the signal, and the first wave of soldiers advanced. Their armored boots shook the ground, their weapons gleaming with energy. The humans braced themselves, but Kale did not move. He waited until the lead warrior was only a few steps away. Then he raised the spear to the sky. The tip of the weapon glowed faintly, and the clouds roared in answer. The soldiers slowed. The glow turned into a burst of blinding blue light. A crack of thunder ripped through the air so loud it made even the seasoned Zarin warriors stumble. The spear was no longer plain wood. It burned with pure lightning, the shaft trembling with raw power. Rain began to fall, each drop sizzling when it touched the spear's surface. Gasps filled the field. The alien princess took a step forward, her eyes widening. She had heard old stories of the sky splitter, a weapon said to call the storm itself. Those were myths told to children. Yet here it was, held in the hands of a human who had moments ago seemed powerless. Kale looked at the spear, then at the enemy ranks. The wind howled, whipping cloaks and banners into the air. The lightning around him grew so bright that the shadows of the alien soldiers danced wildly on the ground. The laughter was gone. In its place was silence broken only by the storm's roar. And then Kale moved. Kale lunged forward with the spear, and the lightning screamed as it tore through the air. The first Zarin soldier tried to block, but the energy ripped his weapon apart in a flash. Sparks showered across the ground, and the smell of burning metal filled the battlefield. The rest of the front line hesitated, their confidence cracking. For the first time since the march began, the storm above responded to every movement Kale made. Clouds swirled faster, and lightning veins danced in the sky. Each step he took left a faint glow on the wet ground. The human fighters behind him stared in shock, unable to believe that the same man they had seen farming days ago now carried the power of a god. Even the alien princess, who had come expecting to mock him, could not look away. The Zarin captain roared in anger, pushing his soldiers forward again. Energy blades hummed as they closed the distance. Kale shifted his stance and slammed the spear into the earth. A column of pure light erupted upward, splitting the storm clouds in two. Rain poured harder, drenching armor and faces, but Kale's weapon remained bright and untouchable. The captain slowed his charge, his eyes narrowing as if facing something ancient and dangerous. On the hill, the alien princess took a few steps closer to the fight. The guards around her moved to block the rain, but she waved them away. Her silver eyes studied Kale's movements carefully. There was precision in every strike, but also something raw, as if the storm itself was guiding him. She felt an odd shiver, though not from the cold. She had seen warriors wield powerful weapons before, but never like this. Kale struck again, and another soldier fell, his armor scorched and smoking. The humans behind him finally found their courage, shouting and rushing into the fray. There, mismatched weapons clashed against the sleek alien blades, sparks flying under the storm's glow. For the first time in years, the Zarin line bent backward. The princess' lips parted slightly, her disbelief growing with each moment. The stories about humans had always painted them as stubborn but weak. This was neither weak nor ordinary. The captain called for his second wave, a heavier unit armed with plasma pikes. They moved cautiously, circling Kale in an attempt to trap him. But the moment they closed in, the spear's light flared brighter, casting long shadows over their armor. Kale spun, and arcs of lightning leapt from the spear to the nearest attackers, dropping them instantly. The battlefield smell shifted from rain and metal to rain and ozone. Even the sound of battle was drowned out by the constant rumble of the storm. The princess guards whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at their commander. The weapon in Kale's hands was no mere relic. It was the Sky Splitter, a weapon their own ancestors had once feared. According to legend, it chose its wielder. If that was true, then no Zarin warrior could take it from him without facing the same wrath of the skies. She understood now why her father had forbidden talk of such weapons. Power like this could change the outcome of a war in an instant. Kale drove the spear's tip into the ground again, sending a wave of energy that knocked several soldiers back. The human fighters pressed forward, seizing the opening. Mud splashed, blades clanged, and the air was alive with energy. The rain ran down Kale's face, but his eyes stayed locked on the captain. He knew the fight would not end until the leader fell. The captain knew it too, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his gaze. Only caution. From the corner of his vision, Kale saw the princess watching. Their eyes met briefly, and though she said nothing, there was something in her expression he could not place. Was it fear, or was it something else? The storm crackled between them, as if it sensed the silent exchange. Kale pulled the spear from the earth and raised it high, letting the lightning collect once more in its blade. Captain roared and charged, his soldiers following close behind. Kale's grip tightened, the air buzzing with power. The moment the enemy came within reach, he swung the spear in a wide arc, releasing a blast of lightning that tore through their formation like a living thing. The storm above echoed the strike. With a deafening crack, the battlefield froze for a heartbeat, every eye turning toward the human who had just split the sky. The lightning blast tore a jagged path through the Zarin soldiers, leaving the ground smoking where it struck. Kale's chest rose and fell steadily as if the strike had cost him nothing. The rain hammered down harder, and steam curled from the hot earth. The captain staggered, but did not fall. His eyes were locked on Kale, the mocking grin gone, replaced by a deep scowl. The humans behind Kale cheered, their voices carrying over the storm. They pushed forward, their weapons clashing against the retreating enemy line. The tide had shifted, and even the most frightened among them fought with renewed strength. Kale did not join their cheers. His eyes stayed on the captain, knowing this battle would decide much more than just the field before them. The captain raised his blade and shouted a command. From the rear, a group of elite Xeran guards stepped forward. They wore darker armor, etched with sharp patterns that glowed faintly. Each carried a weapon unlike any Kale had seen, humming with contained energy. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the Storm Guard, warriors trained to counter energy weapons. The princess' gaze sharpened as she recognized them. Her father only deployed Storm Guard when the threat was real. Kale adjusted his grip on the spear. The storm above seemed to sense the coming clash, its thunder rolling in longer, heavier bursts. He stepped forward to meet them, water splashing around his boots. The first guard struck quickly, his weapon moving in a blur. Kale met the blow with the spear's shaft, and the impact sent a shockwave through the air. Sparks sprayed from the point of contact, and the guard staggered back a step. The second guard came from the side, striking low. Kale spun the spear, blocking the attack and using the momentum to release a flash of lightning into the ground. The surge traveled up through the water, hitting the nearest guards and forcing them to retreat. Shouts of alarm rose from the Xeran line. The princess leaned forward, her heart pounding. This was no clumsy human strike. Kale was fighting as if the spear had been his weapon for years. The captain barked another order, and the guards regrouped. They moved in together, surrounding Kale in a tight circle. Rain ran down their armor in silver streams as they closed in. Kale's eyes flicked between them, measuring their positions. His breathing slowed, his shoulders relaxed. Then he drove the spear into the ground again. The resulting flash was so bright that for a heartbeat, the world turned white. When the light faded, half the circle was on the ground, armor smoking. The humans roared in victory and surged forward, but Kale raised a hand to hold them back. His gaze was still locked on the captain, who had not moved during the fight. The captain's expression was unreadable, but his grip on his sword had tightened. The princess watched in silence, the rain dripping from her lashes. She had seen her father's army crush rebellion after rebellion without effort. Now she was watching them falter before a single human warrior. The captain finally stepped forward, brushing aside a wounded guard. His blade crackled with blue light, matching the spear in Kale's hands. The two closed the distance, the sound of rain drowned out by the storm's roar. When their weapons met, the clash shook the air and sent a pulse of energy rippling through the mud and water around them. Every soldier on the field stopped fighting, their eyes drawn to the duel. Kale pushed against the captain's strength, their weapons locked together. Lightning crawled up the spear's shaft and jumped onto the captain's blade, forcing him to pull back. Kale pressed the advantage, striking again and again. Each blow sent sparks flying, the air thick with the smell of ozone. The captain parried, his boots digging into the wet ground as he held his position. The princess felt her chest tighten, unsure if she wanted her captain to win or fall. With a sudden twist, Kale knocked the captain's sword aside and stepped in close. The spear's glowing tip stopped just short of the alien's throat. The storm raged above, thunder rolling like the voice of an ancient judge. The captain's breath came fast, but his eyes stayed locked on Kale's. Slowly, Kale lowered the spear, not out of mercy, but because the battle was already decided. The captain stepped back, lowering his blade slowly. Around them, the Xeran soldiers shifted uneasily. The humans, soaked and muddy, held their ground. No one moved to attack. The air between Kale and the captain was heavy, charged with the storm's leftover energy. Lightning flashed again in the sky, illuminating both of their faces in stark contrast. Kale's breathing was steady, his hands still firm on the spear. The weapon's glow had dimmed, but its power was still present, humming softly in the rain. He knew the fight was not truly over until the Zarin leader made a choice. Either he would order another charge, or he would call for retreat. The silence stretched, and every eye on the field waited for the decision. From the hill, the alien princess stepped forward, her voice cutting through the downpour. "Enough," she said, her tone carrying a weight that made even the captain pause. The guards around her shifted uncomfortably, but none dared stop her. She descended the slope, her silver eyes locked on Kale. Her steps were graceful despite the mud, and her armor caught the flickering light of the storm above. When she reached the center of the field, the humans tensed, unsure of her intent. Kale did not lower the spear, but he also did not raise it. The princess stopped a few paces away from him. Rain traced lines down her blue skin, and her expression was unreadable. She glanced once at the captain, then back at the human who had just split the sky. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice steady. Kale did not answer. His eyes searched hers, looking for deceit or trickery. The storm rumbled again, and the wind whipped around them. The princess tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand something beyond the battle. Her gaze dropped to the spear, and then returned to his face. The captain clenched his jaw but stayed silent. His loyalty to the princess was clear, but so was his pride. He would not admit defeat, yet he could not ignore what he had seen. Kale's power was undeniable, and any further fighting would only weaken their forces. The soldiers shifted restlessly, watching their leaders for the next move. Finally, the princess spoke again. "The sky splitter belongs to the storm yet. It chose you." Her words carried a mix of awe and suspicion. Kale said nothing, though the grip on his weapon tightened. She took a slow step closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why?" she asked. The question hung in the air like another crack of thunder. Kale's only answer was the steady stare he returned to her. She studied him for another moment before turning to the captain. "Stand down," she ordered. The captain's shoulders tensed, but after a long pause, he sheathed his blade. A low murmur ran through the Zarin ranks as the soldiers began to pull back. The humans looked at each other in disbelief, unsure if the retreat was real. Kale did not move until the last of the alien front line stepped away. The rain began to ease, though the storm still grumbled above. The princess stood where she was, her gaze fixed on Kale. The air between them was no longer filled with the threat of immediate violence, but something else had replaced it. It was a tension that neither side could name. Kale finally lowered the spear, resting its tip against the wet earth. The lightning inside it dimmed further, though its hum remained. Without another word, the princess turned and began walking back toward the hill. Her guards fell in around her, their eyes still darting toward Kale, as if expecting him to strike. But he only watched her go, his expression unreadable. The humans slowly relaxed, though the memory of what had just happened would stay with them forever. Kale had faced the might of the Zarin, and had not only survived, but had forced them to stand down. For the first time in years, the humans had won more than just a skirmish. They had won a moment of fear in their enemy's heart. The storm above rolled one last time before beginning to break apart, sunlight piercing through the clouds. But even as the light touched the field, the weight of what had happened did not fade. The war was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The field was quiet, except for the soft hiss of rain on wet grass. The Zarin forces had withdrawn to the far ridge, their banners drooping under the weight of water. The humans stood together, some leaning on weapons, others staring at Kale as if seeing him for the first time. The spear rested in his hand, its glow now faint, but its presence still felt like a heartbeat in the air. One of the human fighters, a young man with a torn sleeve, stepped forward. "You made them leave," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Kale only nodded once, his eyes still scanning the horizon. Victory had been won today, but he knew it was not final. The Zarin were not the kind to accept humiliation quietly. They would return, and next time they would be ready for the storm. The humans began tending to their wounded, using what little supplies they had left. The ground was slippery with mud, and the scent of scorched armor lingered. Kale moved among them, helping lift the injured and checking their condition. Despite the power he had shown in battle, he did not speak of it. To him, the spear was a burden as much as it was a weapon. High on the ridge, the alien princess watched. Her guards whispered in low tones, warning her against returning to the battlefield. She ignored them. Her mind replayed the image of Kale, standing against her people, wielding the storm like an extension of his own will. The stories of the Sky Splitter had always been treated as legend. Now she had seen the truth with her own eyes. The captain approached her, his armor scratched and blackened from the fight. "We should report this to your father," he said, his tone heavy. She nodded but did not look at him. Her gaze remained on Kale. Something about the way he carried himself troubled her. He did not move like a man hungry for glory. He moved like someone who fought only because he had no choice. Back on the field, the clouds began to break apart. Shafts of sunlight spilled onto the ground, warming the cold air. The humans stood straighter, their spirits lifting at the sight. Kale, however, felt the weight of the princess's eyes on him. He looked up toward the ridge and found her watching. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another through the mist and sunlight. She turned and began walking away, her guards falling in step. Kale wondered if she would return, though he told himself it did not matter. His duty was to his people, not to the curiosity of an alien royal. Still, the image of her silver eyes lingered in his mind. He did not understand why, and he did not like questions without answers. The humans began to march back toward their settlement. They carried the wounded on makeshift stretchers, their boots squelching in the mud. Kale walked at the rear, keeping the spear closed but hidden under a rough cloth. He knew the weapon would draw attention from friend and foe alike. The fewer who knew its full power, the better their chances of surviving the days ahead. When they reached the outer edge of their camp, the children ran to meet them. They clung to their parents, relief washing over their faces. The elders stepped forward, their eyes moving from the wounded to Kale. Questions were whispered, and some hands reached out to touch the cloth-covered spear. Kale stepped back, giving no answers. There were some truths that could not be shared yet. That night, the campfires burned low, and the sound of rain gave way to the hum of insects. Kale sat alone near the edge of the camp, the spear across his knees. The storm had passed, but he could still feel its echo in his bones. The power of the Sky Splitter was not something he could forget. It was not his to own. It was his to carry until the storm called for it again. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of wet soil and wood smoke. Kale sat by the dim glow of a small fire, the spear resting against his shoulder. The camp was quiet, though here and there came the sound of a child laughing or a man coughing in his sleep. He stared into the flames, thinking about the battle, and the eyes of the princess watching him from the ridge. In the shadows beyond the firelight, movement stirred. Kale rose to his feet, gripping the spear. A figure stepped into view, the silver glint of armor revealing who it was before she even spoke. The alien princess stood there, rain still clinging to her hair. Her guards were nowhere in sight. She had come alone, her expression calm but her eyes watchful. "You did not have to spare my captain," she said. Kale said nothing, letting the fire crackle between them. She stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the spear under his hand. "That weapon does not belong to you," she continued. "It belongs to the storm. And the storm does not choose without reason." Her words carried no anger, only a strange curiosity. Kale tilted his head slightly. "And yet here I stand with it," he replied. His tone was quiet, but it carried weight. She studied him for a moment longer before taking another step forward. The firelight caught the edges of her silver eyes, making them shine against her blue skin. She seemed less like a warrior now and more like someone searching for an answer. "My people will come for it," she warned. "They will not stop." Kale's grip on the spear tightened, but he did not look away. "Then they will find me waiting," he said. There was no boast in his voice, only certainty. She drew in a slow breath as if committing his face to memory, then glanced toward the sleeping camp. Her gaze softened slightly when she saw the humans resting under the shelter of crude tents. "These people look to you," she said, "not as a weapon, but as something more." Kale's jaw tightened at her words. He had not asked for their trust, he had not wanted it. But now that it was his, he could not turn away. The princess seemed to sense his thoughts, though she said nothing further. Instead, she moved around the fire, stopping just across from him. Kale's eyes never left her as she leaned forward slightly. "The storm will rise again," she said softly. "When it does, the choice will not be yours alone." Her tone held no threat, only an odd mix of warning and promise. Kale did not respond, but the steady way he held her gaze was answer enough. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the quiet pop of burning wood. Finally she straightened and stepped back. "You will see me again," she said. It was not a question. Kale gave no answer, but his grip on the spear shifted slightly. She turned away, her footsteps soft on the wet ground. The shadows swallowed her figure until she was gone, leaving only the firelight and the hum of the weapon in his hands. Kale sat again, the spear across his knees. He stared into the fire, replaying every word she had spoken. Her presence had not been an accident. She had risked coming here without guards for a reason. Whether it was to warn him, test him, or something else, he could not say. But he knew she was right about one thing: the storm would rise again, and when it did, he would be ready. The following days were tense. Scouts returned with reports of Zarin forces gathering in the hills to the east. They spoke of heavy weapons and banners marked with the symbol of the warlord himself. The humans in the camp prepared as best they could, though they lacked the armor and numbers to meet such an army head-on. Kale spent the mornings on the ridge, the spear always in his grip, watching the horizon for the first sign of movement. Children were kept close to the center of the camp. The elders worked to reinforce the crude wooden walls with stone and scrap metal. The air carried a weight, as if the land itself knew battle was coming. Rain clouds formed more often now, and the wind seemed to shift in uneasy patterns. Each night, Kale could hear the faint hum of the sky splitter in his sleep, as if it too was waiting for what was to come. On the third evening, the sky to the east lit up with faint flashes of light. The scouts returned in haste, confirming that the Zarin army was on the march. They spoke of war drums and the clatter of armored beasts pulling siege engines. The sound of their approach carried faintly across the valleys. The humans gathered near the fires, speaking in low tones. They looked to Kale for guidance, their trust in him now absolute. Kale stood before them, the spear planted firmly in the ground. "We hold here," he said. "We do not run. This is our land, our home." His voice was steady, carrying over the wind. There was no hesitation in his tone, and the people drew strength from it. The firelight caught the edges of the spear's metal tip, and for a moment it seemed to glow faintly, as if reacting to his resolve. That night, Kale could not sleep. He sat alone at the edge of the camp, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. The sound of distant thunder rolled across the hills, though no lightning followed. He knew the storm was near, and with it would come the trial that would decide their fate. Somewhere out there, the princess would also be preparing, though whether she came as ally or enemy, he could not yet know. The next morning brought a thin mist that clung to the ground. Shapes began to form in the haze, first shadows, then figures, then the glint of armor. The Zarin army advanced in tight ranks, their banners snapping in the wind. At the front rode the warlord himself, his armor black and gold, his eyes scanning the human defenses with cold calculation. Kale stood waiting, the spear in hand, the hum of its power growing louder. The warlord's army halted just beyond bow range. A horn sounded, deep and resonant, and a figure stepped forward from their lines. It was the princess. She walked without armor this time, wearing a long cloak that whipped in the wind. Her eyes found Kale instantly, and she did not look away as she crossed the muddy ground between the armies. The humans tensed, unsure of her purpose, but Kale did not move to stop her. When she reached him, she stopped a single pace away. "My father will demand the spear," she said quietly. "If you refuse, he will take it by force." Her voice held no fear, only a strange mixture of warning and challenge. Kale studied her face, searching for signs of deceit, but found none. The hum of the sky splitter grew sharper, almost as if it was listening to her words. "I will not give it up," Kale said. His tone was calm, but the finality in his voice left no doubt. The princess's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then she glanced over her shoulder at the warlord, who sat unmoving on his armored beast. "Then you must be ready to call the storm again," she said. Her cloak snapped in the wind as she stepped back, her gaze never leaving. The horn sounded again, and the Zarin army began to advance. The ground shook under the weight of their march, and the clouds above darkened quickly. Kale lifted the spear, its tip glowing brighter with every heartbeat. The first drops of rain fell, cold and heavy, hissing where they struck the weapons. Metal. The storm had returned, and with it came the moment Kale had been waiting for. The Zarin warlord raised his hand, and the front lines broke into a charge. Shields locked together, weapons held low, they moved like a wall of steel. Behind them came the siege beasts, massive creatures with armored hides and eyes glowing red. The ground shook with every step they took. The humans tightened their line, gripping spears and axes, their breaths quick and shallow. Kale stepped forward, planting the sky splitter into the wet ground. Lightning crawled up its shaft, and the storm above responded in kind. Thunder rolled so loudly it felt as if the air itself might split apart. The humans looked to him, their fear replaced with something fiercer. In that moment, Kale was no longer just a man. He was the storm given form. The first wave hit. Zarin blades clashed against human shields, and the line bent under the force. Kale moved like a streak of light, the spear slashing arcs of electricity through the enemy ranks. Where the weapon struck, armor cracked and soldiers fell. Rain poured harder now, running into the churned mud at their feet. The storm's roar was matched only by the cries of battle. The warlord urged his beast forward, cutting through his own soldiers to reach Kale. He was larger than any warrior Kale had faced, his armor covered in jagged edges that seemed to drink the light. In his hands was a great blade that burned with red energy. Each swing cut the air like fire through dry wood. Kale met him head-on, the clash sending a shockwave through both armies. Blow after blow rang out as they fought. Sparks and lightning filled the space between them, lighting their faces in flashes of gold and blue. The warlord's strength was immense, but Kale's grip on the sky splitter was unshakable. Every strike from the human was followed by a crack of thunder overhead. Around them, soldiers from both sides slowed, drawn to the sight of the duel. Then, the warlord fainted, striking low before bringing his blade upward in a deadly arc. Kale caught the blow with the spear's shaft, the impact jolting his arms. With a surge of power, he pushed back, forcing the warlord a step away. Lightning wrapped around the spear like living chains, and Kale drove the weapon into the ground. A column of light exploded upward, splitting the clouds completely and bathing the battlefield in white fire. The shockwave sent soldiers flying and dropped the siege beasts to their knees. The air burned with the smell of ozone, and for a moment, there was only silence. The warlord staggered, his armor cracked and his blade flickering weakly. Kale stepped forward, the storm swirling tighter around him. His voice was steady as he spoke. "Leave," he said, "or face the storm again." The warlord's gaze shifted to the princess, who had moved closer during the fight. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes was clear. This battle was lost. Slowly, the warlord lowered his blade and turned away. His soldiers followed, retreating into the rain until their banners were nothing but shadows in the mist. The humans watched in stunned silence, hardly believing what they had seen. Kale lowered the spear, letting its glow fade to a faint shimmer. The rain began to ease, and the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. The princess stepped toward him, stopping just short. "You have changed the course of this war," she said quietly. "My father will not forget this day." Kale met her gaze, the tension between them unspoken, but heavy in the air. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the retreating ranks. Kale stood for a moment longer, the sky splitter still in his hand. Behind him, the humans began to cheer, their voices carrying over the empty field. But Kale's eyes stayed on the horizon. The war might have paused, but it was far from over. The storm had chosen him, and its call would come again.